All right, so on Monday this last week, I met with a group of young guys. I've been wanting to do that for a long time. They're, I'd say, 21 to 25 years old, and we talked about a broad range of issues from, what are they trying to pursue and do and accomplish to what are the challenges they're facing. And I left that meeting, it really made me step back and think, like, what was it like to be 21, 22, 23, 24, 25? And I remember parts of it really vividly. And I want to share a story with you today because after meeting with those guys, I realized something. And if you've been watching my channel for a while, I've kind of waffled back and forth. And it became pretty clear to me after I thought about it more why I've been waffling back and forth. And it's partly because I was listening to something the other day and they said, think about what is something that you've kind of obsessed over throughout your life, that you never can learn enough about it. You're always interested in it. You're always trying to learn more, things like that. And for me, in some ways, I'm embarrassed to say it, but I think it'll make more sense when I share the story I'm going to share is for me, it was like how to make money and how to keep my money and how to grow my money and how to help people with money and how to make the world better because we're successful on where we allocate our money and our capital. And in some ways, as a Christian, that creates a lot of conflict in me because in certain Christian circles, that's definitely not something that you're encouraged to do. And in many of them, you're told that, like, if you do that, your intentions are evil. And so I have, for the longest time, really fluctuated back and forth with what the heck do I talk about? I do have other interests and there's lots of other things that I want to talk about. But I met with these guys and I realized so many of their questions boil down to, Zach, how do I make a living where I can provide for my family, retire my wife, send my kids to schools that I want to, or put them in sports? Like, how do I give them the life that we desire? Because that life requires money. I'm not the best in the world at that, not by any means, but I'm pretty good at it. And I've spent a lot of time. And for me, a lot of those things come easy. They come naturally. I actually think I could help a lot of people if I was just had the guts to actually talk about it. And so I think what I'm going to start doing more of, I don't know exactly where it's going to go, but I'm going to start talking more about money and about investing. And here's why. It's not because money is the most important thing. It's by far not the most important thing. But what I realized in my life was when I started to understand money and how it works and how to approach finances and wealth building and making money and protecting money and all those things, what I realized is that approach, what I call the investor's approach, which I'm going to share with you over the next several videos, it infiltrated everything else in my life. And then I started thinking on a bigger picture, like, oh, a lot of the problems that we have in society today are because we don't take that approach. We take the consumer approach. Everybody wants everything now and fast and easy, and we feel entitled to it, and we just want. Well, we got a lot of problems in the world today because most of us are just taught inherently, especially in the West, that your role and your purpose in life is to consume. And so we get the byproduct of that. And as a young man, thinking back to being 21 to 25, man, I had a lot of that mentality. And the generation today has a lot of that mentality. And that's because we shifted in our culture in terms of what we teach people life is all about and how to pursue it well with dignity and all those things. And then some people, maybe they don't take the consumer's approach. Maybe they graduate up to the saver's approach. And they think the solution to all the problems is to hoard everything, to save it, and to not be generous and not take risks because I just got to have my nest egg. And that doesn't lead to really great outcomes for most people either. And then some people, they graduate from the saver's approach to the speculator's approach. And they're like, okay, well, I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to go big. I want to get rich quick. I want to make a ton of money. I want to change everything overnight. And that ends most of the time in disaster. And so for me, I had at some point in my journey early on, thank God early on, I had experimented with each of those approaches. And what I realized through the story I'm going to share is that there's a better approach. There's an approach that leads to better outcomes, not just for me, but for everybody around me, for my community, my family, for my country, for my state, for the world. And that's to take the investor's approach. And I've actually made videos about the investor's approach before, and then I shut them down because I got back into this whole idea of like, I don't know, everybody on the internet's talking about money. But for me, I think it's a different perspective and a different approach. And that's what I'm going to share. And I don't know exactly where it's going to go, but for the next several videos, that's what I think I'm going to talk about. So here's my story. When I was 'I'd say 23 years old, right? I had graduated college. I was a baseball player in college. I was really focused on it. I thought, I'm going to make a bunch of money by being a professional baseball player. I'm going to have the life that I desire by smashing home runs and being on national TV and all that stuff. And then I got to college and I realized, wow, everyone's really good here. And many of them are much more talented than me, much more physically gifted than me. I work, I would say, just as hard as anybody. But man, you get to that level and you realize some people are just made to do this. So it became pretty clear to me that if I was going to try and go play professional baseball, I was going to probably have a short stint in the minor leagues, making $800 to $1,100 a month, 6 months out of the year. And then I was going to do what I saw a bunch of my friends doing, which is selling cars in the off season or washing cars or doing something like that. And to me, that sounded miserable. I'm like, I am not doing it. So I decided to pivot, to transition out of baseball. And then I'm like, well, what am I going to do? What am I going to do where I can make good money and provide the life that I want for my family? I got married when I was 20. So by this time in college, I'm already married and like, I already know what it feels like to be broke. You know, I got a scholarship paying for my school, but my wife's in school. So she's working a coffee stand and I'm like, hey, you know, we got to find a better way to do things. And so funny enough, graduate college, take a job in construction, which my dad was a bricklayer growing up. And I knew, like when I went and I was the hod carrier when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, 11, 12, I hated it. I hated making the mud. I hated freezing to death in the winter and feeling like I was getting scorched in the summer. I hated even more when my dad or someone that we worked with would say, hey, I need you to move this huge pile of bricks from where they are here about 25 feet over to there. I mean, I thought it was the most ridiculous thing. It made no sense to me. I'm sure there was a reason, but for me, I realized really early on, like, I don't want to be a laborer. Nothing wrong with that. Like, we need those guys and they are some of the best craftsmen in the world. So I'm not down on it. I just knew for me, it wasn't what I wanted to do. And so oddly enough, I graduate college, I get back into construction. And it wasn't too long before I realized, I really like construction. I like the building and the creating and the imagining and all those things and even the coordinating. But man, I don't like the manual labor that I got to do every day. And so I started thinking, okay, well, what can I do? I got a degree in communication. Most of the people that I knew in my life, which wasn't very many, who had done well financially, were in some kind of sales role. Like I didn't know any real business owners that I can think of, maybe a couple, but like I didn't know a lot of people who had been doing really well financially. But I had learned through school and some of the people I met through baseball and their parents that it was like, well, you can be a salesperson and you get to eat what you kill, or you can be a business owner and it's kind of the same thing. And that was about the extent I knew of it. So got out of construction, got into a sales job. I'd say I'm 23 now, and I start making a lot of money in sales. I start making a lot of money at a young age. My wife's married. She starts working with me. We start making a lot of money together, like, you know, multiple 6 figures. And I don't say that because I'm like, oh, I'm great, or it's a flex. I say that because it's going to matter in the story I'm about to tell you. Because on the surface for us, we're like, hey, we're making pretty good money and now we can afford all the things we want. So we go out and we had bought a house right when we got out of college. We were one of those people who did the ninja loan thing, you know, no income, no doc. We were the people who, for the ones that it went bad on, it was kind of what caused in many ways the Great Recession. So anyway, we had one of those houses. Thankfully, we were able to sell it, but then we bought another one. And actually we bought the second one about before we had sold the first one. So I'm one of those guys that I don't know anything about money. It's not like my parents didn't teach me because they didn't want to teach me. It's like, you know, they were doing the best they could and we were doing the best we could, but nobody ever really taught us. Like school didn't teach us. Nobody taught us about money, how it works, any of that stuff. And so here I am, I'm making good money. Now I got 2 houses. I put no money down on either of them. This is 2006, 2007, rolling into 2008. In 2006 and a half, I bought that second house. I put $20,000 on a credit card to remodel it. And I did all the remodel myself because I put on the credit card because it was like 12 months, no interest. And I thought, oh, that's a good idea. I can pay it off in 12 months, which I could, but I mean, not a very good financial decision. Oh, and I had 2 car payments. We had a boat and a boat payment. I had made my first stock investment, right? I called it a stock investment. I didn't know anything about the stock market or anything about how it worked. I just knew about business and selling. And I thought, oh, well, I'm going to start investing my money. And so I made a stock investment and I invested a good chunk of money. I had no idea what I was doing. I realized later it was a penny stock and they were doing a pump and dump and I got dumped. That's how I think about it. Like it went to zero. That's what I'm trying to. So up until I'm, let's say, 24 and a half years old, on paper, it looks good. I'm making money, but I've got a ton of debt. I've got a little bit of savings and I've got a minuscule net worth. And I realized like, hey, this is not the future that I want. Like, I don't think this ends very well. I'm not inherently risk averse, but I'm also not inherently like a gambler. So I know intuitively that something's gotta give, something's gotta change. And then a friend of mine gives me a book that changes my whole life. And this is gonna be the whole point of the video moving forward. He gives me this book called The Making of an American Capitalist about Warren Buffett. And I mean, I start reading that book and I devoured it. I think I read it in 2 days. and it just sent me on this journey that changed my entire life. I realized in reading about Warren Buffett that there's a different way, there's a better way. The guys and the gals that really make it to the place that I think that I want to go from a financial standpoint, they are doing something different. But what I loved about Warren Buffett, because I read that book, and then I read every other books that I could read about Warren Buffett, and then I read all his shareholder letters, and I read, The Intelligent Investor and securities analysis or security analysis that were written by his mentor. And then I read about Charlie Munger, his partner, and then Peter Lynch and Ken Fisher. I started reading as much as I could. Then I got even further. I read Robert Kiyosaki, and I read actually a couple of Donald Trump's books, or maybe one, at least one. And then I read books about options trading. I read all these different things to try and figure out, like, what are these people doing that I don't understand? And I just naturally gravitated towards Buffett and Munger. And a lot of it was because it just seemed like what they were doing was different. Like, one of the ways I think about it is they were beating the market over the long term, like crushing the market, but never like pounding on their chest. It was never about ego. It was never about, fancy yachts and any of those things. It was about the game. It was about, how can I be really good at allocating resources in a way that delivers the best long-term return on those resources? And for whatever reason, to me, that really intrigued me. And so I went down this whole deep rabbit hole. I learned everything I could. But at the time, it was like all head knowledge. I didn't have a mentor teaching me. I didn't have anybody that I knew in my family or any of my friends. It was just like, hey, I'm going to learn this stuff. It's really like lighting me on fire. But I had started to also realize that in the areas of my life, I had had some success. I was applying a lot of those same principles. I just didn't realize that those same principles would apply when it comes to like money and wealth building and finances, things like that. In my baseball career, like, I knew intuitively what it meant to invest. I mean, I can remember in high school, 6 a.m. every morning, bam, 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 hitting baseballs. And then as soon as school got out, we're either at practice, or if it's not during season, we're out hitting baseballs, throwing baseballs. We were sowing and sowing and sowing, and we were cultivating and cultivating and cultivating. And we were having to be real picky and choosy about what we were sowing into and where we were spending our time. And then we got to reap the harvest later. It was like, I understood that in that area, but I didn't understand how to apply it with money. But now I'm starting to understand. And so it doesn't start to just change my financial life. It starts to change how I do everything. Like, I talk a lot about my 6 core pillars, which are faith, relationships, health, work, money, and time. And I start realizing, if I start thinking of things from an investor's approach or an investor's mindset as it relates to all those things, like, I think I'm going to get better outcomes, because these guys that I'm learning about, they seem like in many ways they get great outcomes. And so I start trying them. And here's what ends up happening. So this is 2008. The world is totally falling apart. I really am hating my job, even though I'm making a bunch of money. And then some things happen, and I start realizing, things aren't exactly what I'm being told. And so I'm going to go a different direction. And so my wife and I, we quit what we're doing sometime late 2008. And the whole world is economically falling apart. And even though I had made some dumb financial decisions, by this time I had started learning these things. So I had saved a bunch of money, enough money where I could live for about a year if I didn't make any more money as I ventured into my new thing. Well, I decided to go into commercial real estate. And the reason being was because I felt like, all the value investing stuff, all the growth investing stuff I learned about the stock market, I really think there's an opportunity to apply some of that in the commercial real estate world based on what I had learned about commercial real estate from a family friend. And that family friend introduced me to some people who gave me a shot. They decided, we'll give you a shot to let you become a commercial real estate broker. And so in February of 2009, I get into commercial real estate as a broker. My wife had also quit, and she had started her own nutrition business. And so now we're like, okay, well, we get to put some of this stuff that we've been learning to work. And so I'm helping her on the strategy and some of that in her business. And she's really naturally talented. And so that thing is doing really well. It's taken off. She killed it. For me in commercial real estate, like in April of 2009, I think the Dow Jones hit 6,000. I think it had been up to 14 or 16,000 before that. So things are not going good. And I don't think I've ever publicly told this story before. So I started in February of 2009 as a broker. And there's nothing going on. There's nothing happening. So I'm learning like Khan Academy. If you're familiar, Khan Academy is a website you can learn on. It had just kind of come out. And I'm learning everything I can about collateralized debt obligations and how the banking system works and how everything I could. And then I'm reading like accounting books because there's nothing happening. So I'm just learning and learning more and more and more about how does money work? Like, how can I differentiate myself? How can I understand the bigger picture here? Because this is probably going to happen again someday. And so that's what I'm doing. Well, as I'm doing that, I get my first client. And I don't know if they'll ever watch this, but girl I went to high school with, her and her husband had decided to start a chiropractic clinic. And so they are my first like actual client, and we're gonna get this lease signed. And by now it's probably July of 2009. So I've been in this for 5 months. About that time, one of the partners, there were 3 partners at the firm that I had worked for. And one of them comes to me and says, "Hey, Zach, I've been watching you, and I think that, honestly, I think you have what it takes to be successful in this business. And one of my partners is looking to retire," which when I started, I had no idea, right? And he goes, "What do you think about, would you be interested in buying her out?" And I'm like, well, there's nothing happening. And I've learned a lot about investing, but I've never really, other than the stocks that I bought that didn't go very well, or the houses that I over leveraged, which thankfully I sold. The first one broke even. The second one I'm hanging on to. I'm thinking, yeah, I think what I learned from Warren Buffett was be greedy when others are fearful, and fearful when others are greedy. And everybody's really afraid right now. And he always said, pay a fair price for a great business. And I'm like, she's willing to sell it to me for a fair price. And I really think it's a good business. They've been in business over 20 years. They've got recurring revenue, then they've got big revenue from commissions, and then they invest in properties. And I'm thinking, yeah, this kind of seems like exactly what I've learned about. And so I decide I'm going to go for it. So I buy her out. And she finances it for me, did an amazing thing for me. Probably never could have done it if she didn't do that. And that was my first major investment. About 1.5 years later, I bought out that partner who had approached me. He was my second partner that I bought out. And then I bought out the third and last partner at the end of 2012, about 3 years after I had started, about 3.5 years maybe. In 2012, I also put together a group of people. We raised money and bought a storage facility. That was my first money raising commercial real estate investment. We've done several since then. And I say all that to say, my business that I bought, and I bought it in so many ways because of all the things I had learned, reading those books, watching those videos, listening to interviews, all that. It's paid for itself. It's worth multiples of what I paid for. And then all the properties that we've bought along the way have generated cash, and generally speaking have been good investments, and they've delivered really good, solid returns for the partners. And it changed my life, right? I look at when I met with those guys the other day, and they're 21, 22, 23, 4, 5. And I remember where I was at that age. And then I think fast forward today, I'm 42 years old. And again, I'm not saying this as a flex. I'm just saying it as, I think it's a travesty that we don't teach the next generation about money, about wealth, about investing, about how all this stuff works, because it infiltrates everything in our lives. And I think how different my life looks like today because I learned that skill set, but primarily because I learned the mindset, the approach. And I try my best to take that approach into everything that I'm doing. And so today, as an example, right, I have the business. I have another business. I have other properties. I have no personal debt. And I think at 25 years old, I basically had $0, maybe $50,000 net worth because I had so much debt. And even though I was earning a good living, I was never going to get where I wanted to be. And then I fast forward to today, and it's literally the polar opposite. And I think, man, if we want to see the next generation thrive, if we want to see our generation thrive, we have to start teaching the realities of money. And in future videos, I'm going to get into what I actually consider to be the investor's approach, but I'll give you a couple of highlights, a couple of things that for me that you can think about in your life that really changed my life. And I'm going to look at some notes here because I want to juxtapose them with these other approaches, right? I mentioned them earlier, but I think of the consumer's approach. That's most people most of the time, and then the saver's approach, and then the speculator's approach, and then the investor's approach. So in the consumer's approach, right, we condition people to believe that things should be easy, comfortable, convenient, right? We're talking about giving people fish all the time. How many problems in society, how many problems in our finances exist today because we think things should be easy and convenient, and we think people should just give us stuff, right? Consumers are all about getting it now. I don't want any long-term sacrifice. I want it right now, right? Speed, that's a big consumer thing. Consumers are also about that status, right? When I was 23 years old and I got an Audi and a BMW and a boat, and I'm if I think back really why, it's because at that age, there was this status thing in my brain. I want people to think that I'm doing well. Right? Warren Buffett, he lives in the same house he bought 50 years ago. He doesn't care. He drives a Buick, I think, right? And sure, he has other luxuries that most of us don't have. But my point is for him, and what I appreciate about him and about Charlie Munger, it was never about the flash. It was never about pounding on their chest, right? In the consumer approach, so often it's the opposite. I'm going to stop there with the consumer's approach. I think you get kind of the point. The savers now, we like to glorify this idea of saving in our culture. If you're not a consumer, hey, be a saver. But the reality reality is a saver turns into a hoarder, turns into somebody that becomes so risk averse. They're so afraid to like let go of the reins and take a risk and take a calculated risk because they're about security and safety, right? So we say, hey, make sure you save enough money. Preserve your purchasing power, even though saving will never do that for you. They get fixated on their own needs. Like, oh, I can't really do that because I got to take care of myself. It becomes sort of this inclusive mindset, right? It becomes the saver's mindset. It's like, I got to put a wall around everything that I own. And then we get the speculator's mindset. And they're the interesting ones to me, because in some ways they do a lot of good, and in other ways it doesn't end very well oftentimes. And these are the guys that are like speed, agility. I want to get rich quick. I want to make an impact right now. Like, I can't think 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road. It's like, got to happen next week, right? So they're speculating. They're always taking big risks, big gambles. They enjoy the thrill or the euphoria of like the ups and the downs, right? They talk and deal a lot in the realm of competition, right? They're always competing. I got to be better than this guy right now. And so you just get kind of this hurried, frazzled, big low, like a yo-yo sort of reality to your life. And then for me, the investors, it's a little bit different, right? So I think about it like investors like Warren Buffett incorporate all three of these others. So they would say like, yeah, there's a time to consume, but it shouldn't be your primary ethos. There's a time to save. Like when I met with the young guys, one of the guys asked me like, how do I become more frugal? And I said, well, that's the wrong mindset. It's not about becoming more frugal. Everything that you need in life is going to keep getting more expensive as long as we have fake money to trade with. So the solution is never to just keep cutting. You will end up living miserably that way because you'll always be looking at the glass half empty. Instead, what we should do is say, how do I grow my earning potential, right? And so not how do I become more frugal, but how do I look to be frugal enough, right? And then like what I told him is have 3 to 6 months of savings in your bank account. And then after you get to that point, like you got to start investing. You got to start sowing seeds. And for me, where I'm a little bit different than maybe other financial gurus out there, is like, I don't think once you have your savings fund that you should start investing in the stock market or start buying real estate yet. I think you should start investing in yourself. I've spent a lot of money over the years on courses and on trainings and books and seminars and all these things because I want to invest into my own personal growth. Because if you think about it, if you're making $50,000 a year right now, and you took, let's say you had an extra $5,000. If you take that and you put it in the stock market, you put it in the S&P 500 index fund, and let's say you earn 8% a year, it's going to take you almost 10 years to double the 5,000 to 10,000. If you take the 5,000, you invest it in yourself, and you become more valuable to your employer, to some other employer, you develop a more beneficial skill set. Next thing you know, you might be getting paid $75,000 a year. And if you were getting paid 50, now you're 75, that's 5x on your money. That could happen in a year. And then that compounds over time. And so for me, it's like, there are other ways to do that. Okay. So investors are patient. Now, consumers not patient. Savers are too patient. Investors are just patient enough, right? They're making decisions. So I think that Warren Buffett says it, that the definition of investing is foregoing consumption today with the anticipation that you'll be able to consume more tomorrow. And so, yeah, that's true in money, right? It's true in money that if we find a way to put our capital to work in something today where instead of using that money to consume or to save, we actually put it to work into the right thing, eventually that will grow and grow and grow, and we will be able to consume more later because we sowed it into something that was growing, right? But here's the deal. That's true in your relationships. That's true in your health. That's true in your work, right? If you want to be healthy and fit and you want to be able to wrestle with your kids when you're a grandparent, it's like, well, you're going to have to give up something today. You're going to have to give up the donut or the extra drink of alcohol or whatever. And so often, so many of our problems in life come down to the reality that we won't do that because we have the consumer's approach instead of the investor's approach. Margin of safety. The greatest investors, there's always a margin of safety. Speculators are like, I'm putting it all on black. And an investor, a great investor, is saying, listen, like, I'm going to take a risk, but I'm going to take a risk when I know there's a margin of safety. And so anyway, that gives you kind of an idea of, as I'm sitting there and I'm thinking about these young guys and their future and where they're going and what they're pursuing, I just couldn't help but say, man, like, it almost starts with, if I can help them to learn the investor's approach, then certainly it will help them succeed in their finances. But more importantly, it will help them succeed in all these other areas of life, because in my reality, in the life that I've lived, besides my faith in Jesus, the next closest thing to the thing that's led to the greatest outcomes, the greatest transformation in my life, has been changing how I approach things, changing my approach from a consumer or a saver or a speculator. When I dumped my money into a penny stock knowing nothing about it, an investor would never do that. They stick within their sphere of competence. If I can help these young guys learn that approach and apply that approach to all the different areas of their life, man, I believe that they will find themselves in a better place than they otherwise would. And I believe it because it's what happened to me. It is my story. So anyway, I don't know if that was beneficial to you or if that spoke to you, but if it did, I'd love it if you would share it with somebody, because I really think, going back to where I started, I have been so hesitant to share this because it can so easily come across as if I think that it all comes down to money and wealth and all those things, and none of that's true. But I think all of those are a picture or a microcosm of how we approach, not always, but a lot of the times, how we approach other things in our life. And so I believe in the investor's approach. I know it's changed my life. I think it can change yours too. If that was helpful or if anything in there spoke to you, I'd love to hear about it. You can share it in the comments or send me a DM or send me an email, however you can get a hold of me. And again, if you think it would help somebody that you know in your life, I'd love if you'd share it with them. If you like this kind of content and if you'd like to follow along for the journey, would you please like, subscribe wherever you're listening to it or watching it? And with that, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you giving me your attention for 29 and a half minutes, and I'll see you next time.